Welcome back to our channel. We live in a world obsessed with wealth, money, status, power, connections. Every day we chase value. But what if the most valuable thing we have isn't in our wallets or bank accounts? What if the greatest currency we possess is something we could never earn? The grace of God. In this world, value is measured by what you own. But the truth is, you can have all the riches in the world and still be poor in spirit. The greatest wealth doesn't come from accumulation, but from forgiveness. It doesn't come from what you build, but from what God rebuilds in you. Psalm 51 verse 4. Against thee, thee only, have I sinned. These words from David remind us that real currency isn't gold, it's grace. David's story was one of power and promise. Until sin broke his heart and humbled his soul. But when he cried out, "Against you, God, and you alone have I sinned," something changed. That confession wasn't weakness, it was wealth. He realized what no earthly treasure could buy, the cleansing power of grace. When we come before God in honesty and humility, we trade shame for mercy, guilt for grace. That's the divine exchange, our sin for His grace. Every other currency loses value. The dollar drops, gold fluctuates, crypto crashes. But grace never devalues. Grace is heaven's currency, backed by the blood of Jesus, guaranteed by the cross, and available to anyone who believes. Romans 5 verse 20 says, "Where sin increased, grace increased all the more." That means no matter how far you've fallen, grace can reach deeper still. Grace doesn't run out. Grace doesn't expire. Grace is the greatest currency you can ever hold. Grace teaches us what money never can, that our value isn't in perfection, but in redemption. You might have failed. You might have fallen short. But your mistakes don't define your worth. God's grace does. Grace doesn't ignore sin. Grace redeems it. David's story didn't end in shame. It ended in restoration. Why? Because he humbled himself and came back to God. Grace doesn't erase truth, and it transforms it. So don't count what you've lost. Start valuing what you've been given, because grace is wealth that cannot be measured. When guilt tells you you're disqualified, grace tells you you're forgiven. Guilt chains you to the past. Grace calls you forward into purpose. You may not have all the money, position, or recognition you want, but if you have the grace of God, you are more richer than you realize. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 10, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am." Now, my friends, don't get it twisted. Grace isn't a license to sin. It's the strength to start again. It's what makes broken things beautiful and gives meaning to our mess. Therefore, if grace is your greatest currency, spend it wisely. Spend it by forgiving others. Spend it by showing mercy. Spend it by being kind when the world expects you to retaliate, because the more grace you give, the richer your soul becomes. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation. Psalm 51 verse 12. That's what grace does. It restores joy where shame once lived. So hold your head high today. You may have failed, but you are forgiven. You may be flawed, but you are favored. You may have stumbled, but you're still standing in mud by grace. Listen to me carefully, my friend. Grace is not weak. Grace is not fragile. Grace is the most powerful force in the universe. It breaks chains that no therapy could loosen. It restores hearts that the world has written off. It takes a murderer like Moses, a liar like Jacob, an adulterer like David, and turns them into vessels of divine purpose. That's what grace does. It doesn't just forgive you. It redefines you. The grace of God is the reason your story isn't over. The reason the enemy couldn't destroy you. The reason you're still standing, even after the mistakes, the shame, the sleepless nights. Because when sin said, "You're done," grace said, "I've already paid for that." When guilt whispered, "You can't come back," grace shouted, "You were never out of my reach." When the enemy declared, "You're finished," grace declared, "It is finished." So stop living like you're bankrupt when heaven has deposited mercy into your account. Stop walking like a victim when grace has made you victorious. Stop letting your past define your price tag. Grace already paid it in full. Grace is not a license to remain broken. It's the power to rise up renewed. Grace doesn't give you permission to stay. where you are. It gives you power to become who God created you to be. Notice, David's cry in Psalm 51 wasn't defeat, it was a rebirth. Against thee only have I sinned wasn't an admission of despair, it was the doorway to deliverance. Because the moment you admit your need for grace is the moment grace floods in like a river and rewrites your future. So, don't you dare let shame hold you hostage. Don't let regret silence your song. Grace has already opened the prison door and it's time to walk out. The greatest currency you have is not in your hands, but in your heart. It's not what you've earned, it's what you received. And so today declare, I am not defined by my failures. I am defined by His forgiveness. I am not living by my strength. I am living by His grace. I am not a product of my past. I am a testimony of His mercy. Grace is the breath in my lungs. Grace is the reason I'm not who I used to be. Grace is the currency of heaven, and I am rich beyond measure. So as you go through the day, don't measure your worth by what's in your wallet. Measure it by what's in your spirit. Because if you still have grace, you still have everything. And the same God who forgave David restores you. The same grace that lifted him up will lift you. Yes, you may have sinned, but you are still seen. Yes, you may have fallen, but you are still favored. Yes, you may be scarred, but you are still chosen. The world's currency may fade, but grace never runs out. So walk in it, speak from it, live by it, and let the world know, the greatest currency I have is the grace of God. Grace is the wealth that never runs out. Thanks for joining me today. If you have been blessed by this morning's devotional, won't you hit the subscribe button, like, share, and comment below. See you tomorrow for more inspiring messages to help you throughout your faith journey. By grace alone. Repeat this to yourself every moment of the day. The greatest currency I have is the grace of God, and it will never, ever run out. Grace is the wealth that never runs out.